Welcome back to Roundtail Restoration, everybody. My name is Chris. As you can see, I've got the rear differential installed from a 1964 Triumph TR4. A little bit of a pain in the rear. I kind of learned some tricks and asked some questions as I went. I'll show you how I did it. May not be the most efficient way or the best way, but with no weight on the frame, it's kind of hard to get springs compressed and things like that. So it went okay. I didn't hurt myself, so you gotta like that. Thanks for watching. Let's get it sorted. Got a little bit of prep work here to do. So first things first is we've got to put the bushing in the large eye of the rear leaf spring. So I've got new bushings here that I picked up from Moss, I think, and just put a little bit of that super lube stuff on there. Just kind of help me a little bit. And we're just going to use the press to get it started, and then we'll use a socket to kind of finish it off here, just to push it down all the way. So that's all there is to that. We'll get these over to the car, start getting stuff put on there properly. Real quick, if you had watched my most recent videos, have been a couple shorts that I recorded at the Goodwood revival. I was lucky enough this year to be able to head to England into the Chichester area and attend the Goodwood revival this year, the 2025 Goodwood revival. Just an absolute blast. I probably would have done things a little bit differently than the trip that I did. I went all 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I might not do that next time. But if you want some details, or if you're thinking about going and you want some lessons learned from a first timer, feel free to reach out to me via email, roundtailrestoration66@gmail.com, and I'll let you know kind of how I would do things different or whatever. One of the greatest parts of the trip was that I ran into Randall from Northern Ireland, who's a subscriber of mine. I just happened to, the weather wasn't that great, and my wife and I kind of got off behind a building that we could kind of shield ourselves from the wind and the rain, and Randall happened to be standing there, and we kind of struck up a conversation, and we talked for probably a good 5 or 10 minutes, and he's a Austin Healey guy, owns an Austin Healey 3000, also is a Spitfire guy, and he had like lapel pins or something like that, and that had the Austin Healey emblem and everything, so I kind of picked up on that, obviously, and we were talking about the cars, and I'm like, well, I'm a Triumph guy, and his face lit up, and he recognized that I had this YouTube channel, and we just had a great conversation after that, and that's I think that's the first time I've ever run randomly into a subscriber of mine, let alone the fact that I'm thousands of miles away in a foreign country. And I geeked out a little bit, did a little bit of math, and if I did it right, based on the number of subscribers that I have in the UK and how many people are at the event, about 150,000 people coming in over the weekend, believe it or not, and pretty conservative calculations. That was a 1 in 250 person chance to run into Randall. So shout out to Randall. Nice getting to talk to you. Nice getting to meet you. That was a great experience. And let's get back to work. So I unfortunately forgot to turn on my microphone, so the rest of this is going to be mostly voiceover. So here we're going to be replacing the seal for the pinion bearing, and I did not disassemble the internals of the differential at all, except for minor looks, because one, I just didn't have confidence that I'd be able to really change anything out, and it felt fine and all that kind of stuff, so I didn't want to press my luck like I have with my Triumph Spitfire differential, which I still can't get right. So this pinion seal, essentially, I'm just going to knock it in with a big ass socket, and the end of it is tapered a little bit, but it's still a little bit painful to get lined up, especially with a little bit of paint I got in there. So I'm using a little bit of oil here just to kind of help it be a little bit more slippery, and then I'll just take that socket, get the seal lined up as straight as I can, and start knocking it in. It does give me a little bit of grief at some points, but eventually I'll get it. You can see there it's crooked, so I try here a couple times. All right, so I finally got it started, get it lined up, and then just
tap it home, not really trying to wail on it or anything like that. Just get it lined up, and there is a little seating surface in there, and pretty much trying to drive it home into that seating surface. On the inside is a little rib, that little rim that's in there, and I smacked it a little too hard. I kind of caved it in a little bit, but I don't think that's going to be a problem because I don't believe I deformed the seal at all. I guess I'll find out when I get it filled with oil and it starts leaking all over the place. So next I've got the flange here, got that painted up and just pulling off the stuff where I don't want the paint to be, where the seal is. So we'll go ahead and just gonna get that again lubricated up, get that slid on and in contact with the seal, and then there's a large nut that's on the end of that, inch and a quarter, something like that. Get that on, and that gets tightened down to pushing 100 foot-pounds or something like that. But because I'm not going to really be able to get that torque on it with this just sitting on the bench here, I'm just looking to get it seated out, get the big flat washer and the nut on there, and then we'll save it for future me to get it actually tightened down. All right, just driving it home, making sure it's all straight, going around the four corners or whatever, and then we'll get the flat washer and the nut on. And that nut is castellated, so eventually there also will be a cotter pin in there. So next up here, what we're going to be doing is removing and replacing the axle tube seals. This ended up being a real pain in the rear. There are a couple of reasons. One, just because it's real hard to get a purchase on the inside of that seal. There's another landing zone, like a lip behind that seal. And what you don't want to do is use whatever puller or whatever you're having to contact that and not the seal itself. Because one, you could break it, chip it, whatever, and just, waste your time pulling on a part of the axle, vice a part of the seal itself. Now, these seals were older, and so that was a metal ring with like a fiber inner portion. So I'm going to mess around quite a bit with the puller and all that. But what I ended up doing was taking a razor knife and cutting the seal portion out, the felt or whatever it was, and that kind of opened up the seal, and I could see the ring part of it, and I was able to get the puller in there, spread the feet open of the puller, the fingers, and then eventually kind of just be able to pop it out. But the other problem with it was that the previous owner had put a sealant of some sort on there. You can see here I'm taking the razor knife and cutting that inside out. There was a sealant in that sealed that seal in. How many times can I say seal? And that just held it up and made it so it wasn't really easy to get out. So now I got all the fabric and the leather or whatever that is. That's a portion of the seal. I got that all out of there. There's also a little spring ring that's kind of inside of that. And I think that just keeps tension on the seal to keep it on the axle shaft. And now I'm just trying to pull this seal out. And it gave me some hard time, and I started to wreck the metal, and it was a lot of back and forth. But eventually I was able to get it. Trying to show you a close up here of how the fingers of the puller kind of fit inside the seal without actually being in contact with the landing tab of the axle. All right, so here I finally tightened it up, and after many trials, I finally got it out. And you can see it if you caught a glimpse of that seal there, how beat up that thing was. So now, much just like the Pinion seal, this guy goes in, it's already greased in there, so I didn't have to worry about lubrication. Obviously, it goes in kind of one way. You don't want the hollow end to be facing out. And again, using a socket and a hammer and just knocking it in. And there's another little landing zone in there, so just knocking it in until you get a nice sharp ting out of your socket and your hammer. It doesn't sound like a dull thud, and you know that thing's seated up. All right, so that looks good. Next up is going to be installing the axles themselves, just kind of cleaning the little grease fitting up in preparation for putting the grease fitting on. I ran some new red grease through it to get all the old gunk out of there. And though that hasn't happened yet when I'm talking here or showing you here, but that we'll just get that screwed in and get it tight so that I can grease this thing when I get to the point. And now it's time for the axle. So next up, what we're going to do is install the axles themselves. So there are shims on the axles that provide an end float, and they also provide a centering inside the differential itself, which we'll get to here in a little bit. So I did not play with any of the shims or anything like that. I recorded what I removed in the trust, I guess, that the previous owner had lined all that stuff up properly. But as you'll see here towards the end, I didn't agree and made a minor adjustment, though still was able to maintain use of the original shims. So there are you can get these shims. They're not that they're still available. You can get them at Moss and everything like that. There's various sizes and all that. But the end float on the axles is like 4 to 6,000, so it's pretty tight. But like I said, I retained what I had, and we'll get into installing the shims and the axle. The other thing that has to go in before all of that, however, is the brake back plate, and they have an orientation which I don't really recognize when I'm first doing this, and then I come back eventually and figure out that you've got to line up where the cables are going to come in for the parking brake and all that stuff, and I'll show you that as we get closer to that point. So what we're looking at here is I've got the shims installed as they came off the car, and I've got the orientation kind of figured out for the brake backing plate. As I mentioned, that I had it all screwed up at the first part. The cable that comes back for the parking brake needs to line up obviously where it comes into the actual braking actuation mechanism. Throwing up a little picture here to kind of try to show you where that shows on there. There's a plate in the workshop manual that shows you how that lines up, and I finally kind of figured it out. There's a cable that comes back from all the way from the passenger compartment, obviously where the parking brake actuates, and it kind of comes through this point where I'm pointing out here, and then the cables tie in there and run out to the mechanical actuation. So you just can't, put this wherever you kind of want. You got to line it up properly, obviously, so the cables all line up. So it took me a little bit to figure that out, and I've done so here. And then the axle went in, and you can see the hub out there, and that just kind of slides right in. You got to play with it a little bit just to get it to engage with the inside of the differential as the shaft, that the axle shaft falls in there, but it's not too difficult. So we'll get this all tightened up, and enough to now, as you can see here, get the setup for the end float. So the end float's a pretty tight spec. It's only 4 to 6 thousandths, and there's a little gap in between the hub and where it bolts up to the axle shaft itself, so you can push it in, get it zeroed out, and then use a screwdriver just in that little gap there and kind of twist that screwdriver and get it. And it looks like there's about 3 thousandths on that. And the other thing you got to do is you do one side, you do the other side, and then the other spec you got to look at is inside the differential shelf itself. You want the axle shafts to align properly with the differential, so you want them as centered up as possible. So here in a bit, I'll try to zoom in and show you that. So I've tried to get some light shining on it, and I'm pointing it out so you can see the left to right shaft and then the north to south shaft. And the gap that you're worried about is where you come, the vertical shaft, the north to south one, has got to be as close to you can get it, and as even between the gaps between the shaft that runs right to left. So as you put the axle in from the right and you put the axle in from the left, that's going to adjust that little plug that's kind of in the middle there, and it's got to slide it right or left. And you want that as centered up as possible. So here, though it's hard to see, the axle shafts have got it aligned so where it's pushing to the right more. So there's that larger gap on the right-hand side of the vertical pipe, for lack of a better way to put it, than there is on the left-hand side. So we've got to go back, try to realign those shims, maintaining the end float so that I can zero this up and try to get it a little bit more even than it is right now. All right, so I've got both axle shafts in. I rearranged my shims, and I ended up with the same number of shims and the same thicknesses. I didn't purchase nothing new. I just kind of rearranged them and ended up where I had one thick and one thin on one side and a bunch of thins on the other side. And it gave me the proper end float, the 4 to 6 thousandths on both sides, while lining up the center pipe like I showed you earlier. Better, not perfect, but close enough, in my opinion, to be better, but not not worry about having to be concerned that I'm going to mess something up. What I'm zooming in here right now is the vent pipe. So that is simply a bolt with a fiber washer that screws into the differential housing. It's far enough away from wherever you'd expect oil splash and stuff like that, but there is a hole through this nut completely. So what I did is I took it out, cleaned it out. It was all full of gunk and everything, and painted it, sandblasted it, and painted it. So you want to make sure that that is vented. So if the oil heats up in your differential as you're driving down the road, you don't overpressurize the case and, possibly cause some oil leaks or whatever. So that just provides a vent path for that, for the excess pressure. Next up here, what we're going to do is try to compress the spring, because then when it's fully relaxed like this, it's a little short. And I'm pointing out here, you got a shackle that goes from the frame to the spring. Put new polyurethane bushings on there. There's the shackle. Obviously, you can get it on one side, but when you bring the spring up to try to meet it, you're a good, half inch maybe short. So the way to do that, because I don't have any weight on the car, as you can see, I've got that long 2x4, ends up being a little too long, and a stout C-clamp, and essentially just compress the spring between the board and the C-clamp on the bottom of the spring, and that flattens the spring out and gets that shackle, the two shackle points closer together, and eventually it just kind of gets there, and you put it in. So, but I got to get a smaller board. All right, I got a smaller board here, and probably could have been a little bit longer than this, but it worked. So essentially, what you can't see me doing is putting the C-clamp, and the screw down end is on the piece of wood, and the other end is up underneath the spring. There's a little nub on the spring where a bolt comes through and holds the whole spring, the leaves all together. So just watch for that. And got a rag under there just to try to not scratch paint. It doesn't really take a whole lot. It's not that difficult. A longer board would have helped the leverage a little bit more. And frankly, a little bit stronger of a C-clamp might have helped too, with the handle that had a little bit more oomph to it. But you see here, pretty much it only took a couple turns, and I got it. Now, it's still not quite flat enough, so when I try to put the other side of the shackle on, it doesn't quite line up, so I've got to gronk down on it a little bit more just to kind of bring that up. So one thing I'll point out here, while we're here, and you can see it, the shackle, when it's all said and done, the shackle points nearly vertical, straight up when everything gets put together and compressed and all that. So you just want to make sure as you're doing this and tightening everything, that your shackle is more pointing up than it is down, and eventually it just kind of goes where it needs to go. But you don't want to get stuck with it pointing down and then not figure out why, because the spring is starting to compress it and it's pointing the wrong way. So here's a little bit better of a shot of how everything lines up with the C-clamp and everything. And again, that rag's just to protect some paint. All right, snug up the shackle bolts real quick, just so that I don't, when it gets under tension and all that whole thing just kind of stays together, so I don't lose control of anything. I did order new shackles from the Roadster factory, and they ended up being about a 1/4 inch short, the posts on them, and it really was crushing down on the bushings. So I grabbed my old ones, which were not in great shape, rusty and pitted and everything like that, and compared it. It was obvious that the new ones were a little short, so I got to reach out to the Roadster factory just to let them know that. But I was able to get the old ones into the blast cabinet, get them cleaned up, and get them painted. Again, I'm lifting up here on the shackle just because I don't know what's going to happen when I release the tension, and you can see it's kind of staying almost perfectly horizontal now. So again, as you work it and start to put more load and start to compress the spring more, it'll start to come into where it's going to come in. So same thing, other side. So you can see here that I've manhandled the rear axle onto the frame. Obviously, it's pointing straight down. I'm going to need to point it up when I finally do reassembly. I also got the pan on it, the cover, and just a regular paper gasket, cardboard gasket, and some of that forma gasket stuff. from Permatex to clean that up. All right, so as you can see here, I got the axle on the car, and obviously it's pointing down, so it's going to have to be oriented properly. And I also put the cover on it with just a gasket and the Permatex Forma gasket stuff, so that should seal up just fine. You'll notice in the bottom there, I've got a bottle jack. And essentially what the bottle jack is going to do for me is help me compress that spring, the leaf spring, because the leaf spring's got to come up, got to flatten out, and it's got to come up. And the shackle, you'll see as I do this, the shackle will start to move vertically. And there's a spacer block on the later TR4s. The design is different from the earlier TR4s, but on the later TR4s, there's a spacer block that goes between the leaf spring and the bottom of the axle. So though the focus is kind of coming in and out here, I'm sorry about that, but you can see there's a flat spot on the axle right behind the backing plate for the brake. It's kind of facing you. That's where that spacer block, big hunk of aluminum, is going to mate up with the axle. So the spacer block on the bottom where it makes up with the spring has got a hole in it, and that's where the stud sticking out of this leaf spring where all the leaves are kind of screwed together. That stud, the block fits on top of that. And then there's a hole in that flat portion on the axle, and there's a little stud that sticks out of the top of the spacer block, and all that stuff mates up. The other connection here that you have to do is the lever shock to the spacer block, and I'll show you that when we get there. You see me, I'm kind of jacking up the frame here. So one, I got to clear the bottle jack's a little bit too big, so I'm trying to get the entire frame up so that I can get the bottle jack under there, and then I'll push the bottle jack under and then lower it back down. Again, still a problem with weight here. So you can see the 4x4 that goes in front of the axle, it goes across the frame. What I'll do is I'll take a 2x4, stick it on top of that 4x4 and run it up into the floor joist and kind of pinch the frame so that as I bump this bottle jack up and start to try to compress that spring, eventually it's going to start to lift the frame. So I'm going to trap the frame. You can just see that 2x4 I put on there. I'm going to try to trap the frame between the bottle jack and the floor joist in the ceiling so that the spring will compress. Because if you don't compress the spring, you can't get the spacer block in there and close enough, and you've got U-bolts that go down through the spacer block and through a plate that goes underneath the spring, and all bolts up. Much like the front suspension, it's a big puzzle. There's a lot of stuff that all have to kind of come together at the same time and all that stuff. You can do a side at a time, fortunately, even though the axle is kind of all connected. You don't have to do parallel ops, which is good. You can finish up one side completely and move on to the other one. All right, so there's the spacer block. You can see the little nub sticking out. What I'm pointing out here is the that point with the that's sticking out there, that little connection point. That's where the lever shock link goes. So these are handed, these blocks. So that lever shock link has got to go on the inside, and you'll figure it out if you put them on backwards. Here's the plate that's going to go on the bottom of the spring. It's got a hole in the middle of it, and that hole is to clear the stud that goes through and holds the all the leaves together. So I'm trying to get the bottle jack underneath and as centered up as possible so that when the U-bolts come down from the top and go through those holes that are in that plate, the 4 holes, the bottle jack's not in the way. You can't really use a standard floor jack because, or at least mine anyway, because the lifting point or the pad on the floor jack is too thick. One thing I'll point out here too, and some of you may have picked up on it already, there are polyurethane or rubber bump stops that go and surround the axle, and there's check straps that I have not installed yet. Those should be on the axle right now, and I'm going to figure that out because I have to kind of undo everything and take it all back apart, unfortunately, because I wasn't able to lift the axle. But those should be on there now, and they're just held on with zip ties. The original was like a metal strapping, but that zip ties are much easier and better solution. So you can see back here the shackle as I start to bump up on the leaf spring is starting to rise, and I'm going to have to rotate the axle here in a little bit and mate up the top. You can see that stud sticking out of the top of the spacer block, I believe. You're going to mate that up to that flat portion. Now that I got some tension on the bottle jack, I go ahead and try to lower the frame down a little bit, and eventually that's going to stop. And now you can see that that spacer block got that much closer as the spring flattened out and that shackle moved more vertically as all that started to come together. And again, I think you can more clearly see the hole that's in that flat spot on the axle. So I got to kind of rotate it here, and then we're going to go ahead and continue to jack up the bottle jack and try to bring that block up into meeting up with the axle. All right, so jacking up the leaf spring now and flattening it out, you can see the shackles moving more and more vertically, and eventually that block is going to contact the bottom of the axle. You want to make sure that that is seated properly, and that nub or the stud sticking out of the top of the block is actually engaged with the hole that's in the axle. And essentially when that happens, you'll see obviously that there's the gap between the block and the axle is going to be essentially gone. And now the axle just kind of stays there, which is nice because you don't have to worry about rolling it. So now I've got the U-bolts, and they're going to just go down through, and sometimes you have to mess with those to get the holes to line up and all that because they tend to spread out a little bit. And there's little tabs which you really can't see real well in the camera right now, but I will point them out, I think, in a little bit. There's little tabs that are welded to the top of the axle, and the U-bolts go inside of those tabs, and they just keep them lined up there. I am pointing them out. So you want the U-bolts to be on the inside of the two tabs there so that they don't go wandering on you. Again, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to redo all this stuff because I didn't get my bump stop rubber polyurethane bushings in there. Can't remember when I figured out, but eventually I do. So once you get both of those U-bolts down, the flat washer and knob-lock nut on the bottom of those, get those tightened up, and essentially you get them snug. I didn't go crazy on them, right? Because that's I'm just kind of putting this stuff together to get it set, not to get everything torqued down quite yet. And now that kind of locks everything in. So now the axle is going to be stationary. The spring is going to be compressed as much as it needs to compress. That shackle is going to be vertical, like you can see in the camera, and everything just kind of works. So here I've got the link in my hand that's going to go from the leaf spring block to the lever shock. And fortunately, the studs on this link are of different sizes. The block's stud is bigger around, and then the lever shock is a little bit smaller. Now the link goes in, and unfortunately I don't show a real good picture of it, I apologize, but the link goes in with the threading of the studs coming out at you, so they face outward from the frame. So I wasn't too bad getting it in on this side, but on the other side I struggled to get that link in there, and that's something that you probably want to get at least ready to go earlier in the process than I have it here. I would probably put it in the lever shock and kind of have it sitting there, and then as you come in with the U-bolts and lift this spring up and the block comes up and everything, get it in while stuff is still kind of loose and able to be adjusted, because like I said, on the other side I struggled to get that thing in and ended up damaging a little bit of threads to get it in there. All right about here is where I think I figure out that the bump stops bushings are not in there, and I figure that I got to take it all back apart. So magically here, as you can see, now they're there. They're not lined up properly, and I kind of get my butt kicked by that a little bit, because I try to cheat and not take everything apart, but that doesn't work. The other side I was able to get in there because you can kind of twist it, but this side is kind of hard mounted, so I had to take it all back apart. So now at this point, I've got the bump stops in. You can see the zip ties that are kind of sticking out. I didn't trim them off yet. And I got my U-bolts back on, and everything is good. I'm just kind of getting the bump stop aligned with the frame. The bump stop is kind of squared off. The tops and the bottoms are squared off, so I tried to align that as best I could. You can see on the driver's side that's already in there and already zip tied in. So I didn't go crazy tightening the zip ties because I wanted to be able to rotate stuff. But once everything gets set and everything, I came back eventually and tightened the heck out of them and then snipped them clean. All right, so now I got the 2x4. You could just see that coming out. So right now that the frame is not under tension at all, so I'm going to be lowering everything back down and releasing the spring tension from the bottle jack here. And I had to get that out a little bit, but there you go. So now everything is together for that side, and just a matter of going to the other side and wash, rinse, and repeat. So I had mentioned you there's check straps. So here, that's how the check strap is going to go. It's just a little 3/4 inch bolt and a nylock nut that attaches that to the tabs that are on the frame, and that if you really nail a bump, that check strap is going to contact with that bump stop there and try to prevent you from throwing the axle into the bottom of the car. But yeah, that's just a matter of getting those bolts in there and tightening them up. There's not a whole lot to that.
All right, everybody, that's all I got. Thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Well, sorry about the voice error. I forgot to turn my microphone on, but the rear suspension is in, and the car finally, after several years, is back to a rolling chassis. So next up, we're going to be looking at getting the motor landed, gearbox landed, and get to going on testing those. So thanks again. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.